Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving into a fascinating topic, free will versus determinism. We'll be exploring the key arguments from both philosophical and interdisciplinary perspectives, examining how these ideas connect and contrast with each other. The image behind me, featuring a world map shaped by clouds, symbolizes the vast and interconnected nature of this debate, touching on everything from human choice to larger natural forces. I'm excited to take you through this exploration. Let's get started. When we talk about free will, we're referring to the ability to make choices on our own without being completely controlled by outside forces. It's all about having agency. That is, the power to act intentionally and make decisions based on your own reasoning or desires. A really important part of free will is that it involves alternative possibilities. This means you have more than one option available, so you can choose different paths depending on what you decide. The image here, showing shoes at a crossroads labeled sloth and vitality, perfectly captures this idea of choice between inactivity and energy, or different ways of acting, highlighting the essence of free will. Here we have three key philosophical arguments that support the concept of free will. First, libertarianism claims that free will truly exists, meaning individuals have the real capacity to make different choices, not just ones predetermined by prior causes. This perspective emphasizes genuine alternative possibilities. Next, moral responsibility highlights that free will is essential for holding people accountable for their actions. Without it, praising or blaming someone wouldn't make sense because they wouldn't have control over their behavior. Finally, phenomenology and introspection point to our conscious experiences and self-reflections as evidence that we perceive ourselves as freely making choices. This subjective awareness reinforces the notion that we are agents capable of free decision-making. The statue shown alongside these points symbolizes the dignity and confidence tied to human freedom explored here. Here we're looking at the interdisciplinary evidence supporting the concept of free will. Starting with neuroscience insights, research has found that deliberative neural activity is closely linked to conscious decision-making processes, showing how our brain actively engages when we make choices. Moving on to psychological findings, experiments demonstrate that choice behavior is influenced by cognitive reflection and awareness, suggesting that how we think about decisions affects what we ultimately choose. Lastly, from a behavioral perspective, real-world observations indicate that deliberation has a tangible impact on autonomous outcomes, meaning that the process of careful consideration can shape our actions and results. The image of the chess game perfectly illustrates this, highlighting how strategic thinking and deliberate moves symbolize the complexity of free will in action. Here we're diving into the core ideas behind determinism. At its essence, determinism suggests that every event we observe is part of a chain of causes and effects. Each event is the result of a prior cause, all governed by physical laws. This means that in theory, if we knew all the preceding factors, we could predict what's going to happen next with certainty. So every occurrence isn't random. It has sufficient causes that bring it about. Think of it like a precisely engineered machine, where each part's movement leads inevitably to the next, just like the complex mechanical structure shown here. This interconnectedness of causes is what defines the deterministic view of the world. Here we explore three key philosophical arguments that support determinism. First, let's consider causality. This idea tells us that every event has prior causes, forming a continuous chain of cause and effect. It's the foundation of determinism, emphasizing that nothing simply happens without a preceding reason. Moving on to predictability and laws, the regularity of natural laws allows us to foresee future events based on current conditions. Determinism leans on these consistent laws, suggesting that everything, including human actions, follows predictable patterns. Finally, we have explanatory power. Determinism offers a coherent way to explain how events connect through natural laws, helping us understand where human behavior fits within the larger causal structure of the universe. The image of these aged books reminds me of the deep, enduring knowledge that underpins these ideas. Here, we explore interdisciplinary evidence supporting determinism. First, neuroscience experiments reveal that unconscious brain activity occurs before we become consciously aware of making decisions. This suggests that our choices might be influenced by brain processes beyond our immediate control. Secondly, research highlights the significant role of genetics and environment, showing that both inherited factors and external conditions predictably shape our behavior. Together, these findings build a compelling case for determinist perspectives, emphasizing how both our biology and surroundings influence the decisions we make. Here we're comparing two important philosophical concepts, free will and determinism. On the left, free will highlights our ability to make independent choices. It suggests that our actions aren't fully determined by prior events, which means there's room for unpredictability in behavior. This perspective supports the idea that individuals can be held morally responsible because they have control over their decisions. On the right, determinism takes a different stance. Focusing on causality, it argues that every event is the result of preceding factors, making behavior predictable if we knew all prior conditions. This raises challenges for traditional ideas of moral responsibility, as outcomes are seen as predetermined rather than freely chosen. Understanding these key differences helps us think more deeply about human behavior and accountability. Here we have two key perspectives in the ongoing debate about moral responsibility. On the left, the free will view argues that for someone to be morally responsible, they must have free will. Without it, blaming or praising them doesn't really make sense, because moral accountability hinges on the freedom to choose. Punishment, from this viewpoint, is justified when it is deserved, reflecting true moral responsibility. On the right, the determinist view challenges this by suggesting that responsibility can be reshaped even if free will doesn't exist. In this framework, blame and praise aren't about moral desert, but serve social and practical purposes, like encouraging better behavior. Punishment here is less about retribution and more about consequences, such as deterrence and rehabilitation, aiming to improve society rather than assign blame. The image of the balance scale, with question marks, highlights the complexity of deciding between these views, emphasizing the uncertainty that surrounds how we understand and assign moral responsibility. Here we explore the role of consciousness in the debate between free will and determinism. On one hand, we have the idea of conscious initiation, where our conscious thoughts are seen as the direct cause of our actions and decisions. This perspective supports the notion of free will, suggesting that we have control over what we do through active, aware choice. On the other hand, there's the concept of post hoc awareness. Research in neuroscience indicates that our brain activates certain neural processes before we're even consciously aware of making a decision. This means that the awareness of our choices might actually come after the brain has already begun to act, challenging the traditional idea of free will. Together, these viewpoints highlight the complex relationship between consciousness and how our actions unfold. Here we see the core idea behind compatibilism, which is the belief that free will and causal determinism can coexist. Essentially, it means that even if our actions are determined by prior causes, we can still consider ourselves free when our choices align with our internal motivations. This is a crucial definition because it allows for a form of freedom that doesn't require the absence of causality. Moving on, some influential philosophers like Daniel Dennett and Harry Frankfurt have been strong advocates for compatibilism. They propose a middle ground that reconciles the debate between strict determinism and the intuition we have about free will. Their work highlights that this perspective offers a promising way to understand human freedom without dismissing scientific insights about causation. Finally, the philosophical move that compatibilists make is to redefine freedom. Instead of seeing freedom as the ability to act without any causal influence, they focus on the idea of acting according to one's own internal motivations and desires, as long as there's no external coercion involved. This redefinition helps preserve moral responsibility, meaning we can still hold people accountable for their actions even in a deterministic framework. The image here of a judge and a lawyer shaking hands perfectly symbolizes this professional agreement or conclusion, reflecting how compatibilism bridges the divide between free will and determinism. Here, we explore the important implications for ethics and society. First, let's consider the debate between retribution and rehabilitation. Depending on our perspective, punishment can be aimed either at deterring crime and delivering retribution, or at promoting rehabilitation and reform. This fundamental difference shapes how we approach justice systems. Next, legal responsibility is influenced by our beliefs about free will and determinism. Our standards for culpability change based on whether we think individuals have control over their actions or if their behavior is determined by external factors. This has a direct impact on how laws are applied and enforced. Finally, social attitudes play a crucial role as well. How society views offenders affects the stigma they face and the level of community support available. These attitudes ultimately influence social policies and personal judgments, shaping the broader environment in which justice is administered. The image of the gavel here symbolizes the authority and justice at the heart of these discussions, reminding us that these ethical and societal considerations are deeply interconnected. Here's a summary of the major points we've discussed. First, the concept of free will highlights the importance of personal autonomy and moral agency. It focuses on our ability to make conscious choices and take responsibility for our actions. On the other hand, determinism argues that our behavior is shaped by prior events and follows physical laws, suggesting that everything is caused by something else. Finally, interdisciplinary evidence from neuroscience and psychology shows that decision-making processes are quite complex, while philosophy raises important questions about the ethical implications and accountability tied to whether we truly have free will or if our actions are determined. This balance between different perspectives helps us better understand the nature of human choice and responsibility.